Maritime Management Authority for the period from 1st of August 1998 to 31st December 1998, and for the years ended 31st December 1999 to 2008. Audited financial statements of the Environmental Protection Agency, Wildlife Division for the years ended 31st December 2009 2011. Audited financial statements of the Guyana Energy Agency for the years ended 31st December 1998 to 2009. Audited financial statements of the Guyana Office for Investment for the years ended 31st December 1994 to 2011. Audited financial statements of the Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission, period 1st of June 2001 to 31st December 2001, and for the years ended 31st December 2002 to 2009. Audited financial statements of the Institute of Applied Science and Technology for the years ended 31st December 1994 to 2003. Audited financial statements of the National Parks Commission for the years ended 31st December 1989 to 2007. And finally, sir, the Treasury Memorandum pursuant to Resolution number 48 of 2012 of this Assembly, dated 17th December 2012, on the public economies of Guyana for the year 2009. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister.
Reports of committees. Oral questions without notice. Questions on notice. Statements by ministers including policy statements. Personal explanations. Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the National Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance. Motions relating to the business or sitting of the National Assembly and moved by a minister. Introduction of bills.
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources and the Environment. Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister of Saudi away in the interim, and on his behalf, I write to present to the Assembly Land Surveyors Profession Bill 2013, Bill number 16 of 2013. The bill entitled an act to make provision for the establishment of a board of land surveyors, the registration and licensing of land surveyors, the regulation of the practice of land survey, and for connected matters. And I move that the bill be read for the first time.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Let the bill be read the first time.
Land Surveyors Profession Bill 2013, Bill number 16 of 2013, Public Business, Government's Business.
Members, we have for second debate today the Hydroelectric Power Amendment Bill 2013, Bill number 15 of 2013, which was first published on the 13th of June 2013. Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to defer the second reading of the Hydroelectric Power Amendment Bill 2013.
Thank you. Prime Minister, the bill is on the second reading today. Will you proceeding with it? Defer.
I ask to defer the second reading of the Hydroelectric Power Amendment.
Honourable members, at the request of the introducer of the bill, the Honourable Prime Minister, the bill will be deferred to a date to be named. Thank you. Proceed, please, Mr. Clark. Motion. Members, there is on your paper a motion standing in the name of the Honourable Minister of Finance, the limit and amount of standing on the guarantees given under the Guarantee of Loans, Public Corporations and Companies Act. Honourable Minister of Finance, you may proceed with the motion.
Speaker, with your permission, sir, I would like to ask that this item, that is to say consideration of the motion, be deferred to a future session.
Honourable members, at the request of the Honourable Minister of Finance, the motion standing in his name is being deferred to a date to be announced. Thank you. We come to a second motion on our paper. That is a motion for the ratification of the Arms Trade Treaty, which I believe is a momentous occasion for us, as we've already indicated to the Minister. So I invite the Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs to move the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The right to speak to the motion standing in my name in relation to the ratification of the Arms Trade Treaty. As the motion in place, Mr. Speaker, on April 2nd, 2013, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the first legally binding multilateral treaty to regulate the international trade in conventional arms. 154 countries voted in favor of the treaty, 3 against, and 23 countries abstained. This means that more than 80% of the countries that voted for the treaty, and we consider this a remarkable achievement. Mr. Speaker, the treaty became open for signature on June 3rd, 2013, and now boasts 74 signatories. In addition to Guyana, 10 CARICOM member states are among the current signatories to the treaty. Antigua and Barbuda, Bahamas, Belize, Grenada, Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Speaker, the Arms Trade Treaty fills a critical gap in international law in the important domain of the transfers of conventional arms. Once effectively implemented, it will make a real and positive difference for millions of people around the world, especially those who live in conflict areas. Mr. Speaker, the objective and purpose of the treaty, as stipulated in Article 1 and included in the motion, are as follows: to establish the highest possible common international standards for regulating or improving the regulation of the international trade in conventional arms, prevent and eradicate the illicit trade in conventional arms and prevent their diversion. Battle tanks, armored combat vehicles, large caliber artillery systems, combat aircraft, attack helicopters, warships, missile and missile launchers, and small arms and light weapons. Mr. Speaker, you will see that we produce none of these. Article 2.3 states that this treaty shall not apply to the international movement of conventional arms by, on, or behalf of the state party for its use, providing that those arms remain under that state party's ownership. Mr. Speaker, with respect to human life, it is a fact that the vast majority adversely affected by armed conflict and other forms of violence are civilians. The treaty recognizes this in addition to the security, social, and economic and humanitarian consequences of the illicit and unregulated trade of conventional arms. It also recognizes, Mr. Speaker, the challenges that victims face and their need for care, physical rehabilitation, and social and economic inclusion. Concerning illicit small arms and light weapons, the excessive accumulation and uncontrolled flow of these pose a significant threat to peace, security, and the social and economic development of many countries. Our own country, Mr. Speaker, and the region are witness to the devastating effect of these weapons. Mr. Speaker, I should indicate that small arms and light weapons, that particular issue was a major concern for CARICOM countries, and many of our diplomats worked tirelessly to ensure that that category of weapons was included in the Arms Trade Treaty. First of all, small arms are cheap, light, and easy to handle, transport, and conceal. A buildup of small arms alone may not create the conflicts in which they are used, but their excessive accumulation and wide availability aggravates the tension, according to the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. Most present-day conflicts are fought mainly with small arms, and as I mentioned before, they are the weapons of choice in civil wars and for terrorism, organized crime, and gang warfare. The majority of conflict deaths are caused by small arms. It's a dominant tool of criminal violence. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, more human rights abuses are committed with small arms than any other weapon. Yet, Mr. Speaker, more is known about the number of nuclear warheads, stock of chemical weapons, and transfer of major conventional weapons than about small arms. More than 1,000 companies across the world in about 100 countries are involved in some aspect of production, with significant producers in about 30 countries. About 8 million is produced per year. All of this from the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. Small wonder, Mr. Speaker, why some countries voted against the treaty. Mr. Speaker, it is envisaged that this treaty will contribute significantly to international and regional peace, security and stability, and reduction of human suffering. By effectively regulating the international trade in conventional arms, making it more responsible and transparent, and ensuring accountability, it should help to minimize, if not eradicate, the illicit trade in small arms. Mr. Speaker, this treaty came after 7 years of diplomatic effort at the multilateral level against multiple odds, including the powerful gun lobby. As such processes go, Mr. Speaker, the end result would never be perfect, but it is a necessary and important step forward. It represents a balance of interest, in my opinion, from all sides, including from small developing countries such as ours, who are neither exporters or producers, to the larger arms manufacturing, exporting, and importing countries. As I mentioned before, for CARICOM countries, we were very concerned about small arms and light weapons, and the fact that it is included in this treaty, I think we should congratulate our diplomats who work hard in this regard. Mr. Speaker, I want to particularly point out that the treaty includes the ammunition parts and components and diversion of legal arms in it. It is unfortunate, therefore, Mr. Speaker, and indeed paradoxical, that while I come here today to ask for this treaty to be ratified, and I hope that it will be, that the piece of legislation that came here before us to ensure that domestically we have the necessary legislation in place did not receive the support of the opposition. If it's possible, and I believe anything is possible in politics, we should try to correct the situation, because I think it would be a major contradiction to what we're saying as a country and what we're actually doing. Mr. Speaker, Diana, as a member of CARICOM, the CARICOM negotiating team, we were in the forefront of this negotiating process. And we are extremely pleased that such a large number of countries voted in favor of the treaty and signed on that historic day when the treaty was open for signature. Guyana was one of the countries that signed on that very first day. The signing of the treaty was an important opportunity to reaffirm before the international community our strong commitment to the control of conventional arms. By signing, we have pledged to be a responsible party. It is now time for us to solidify this commitment and take the next step of ratifying the treaty. And I ask this House to so do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. I invite Ms. Afko Selman to join. Before you commence, Ms. Selman, may I just recognize the presence of former member of Parliament, Ms. Nathan Pudalal, who is here with her husband, Pastor Pudalal, and request Evangelist Jones from Tennessee. Thank you. My apologies, Ms. Selman, please proceed.
Arms Trade Treaty, moved by Honorable Minister Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez-Burkett. Mr. Speaker, the Arms Trade Treaty is a multilateral treaty that regulates the international trade in conventional arms. The Arms Trade Treaty is predicated upon the hypothesis that the illicit trade in small arms is a serious challenge which requires global action through the United Nations. Mr. Speaker, the signing of the treaty is timely. In all parts of the world, the ready availability of weapons and ammunition has led to human suffering, crime and terror among civilian populations. Recent extreme human not on the receiving end of the misuse of arms by state armed security forces. As a result of the irresponsible transfers of conventional weapons, we here in Guyana witness a pattern of unlawful killings of undetermined numbers of persons, including assassinations, executions, and other forms of criminal violence during a period of troubles at Agricola, Eccles, Bartica, Bobstat, and Lusignan, and on the parts of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, our experiences taught us that the irresponsible transfer of weapons can destabilize security in our country and create a climate of fear in society. So we've been there. According to studies in peace and conflict resolution, the relative importance of diversion or misuse of officially authorized transfers compared to international illegal black market trafficking has been thoroughly confirmed. And the author here goes on to elaborate that for most developing or fragile states, a combination of weak domestic regulation of authorized firearms possession with theft, loss, or corrupt sale tends to be a big source. Mr. Speaker, the fact that Guyana is among the first set of nations to sign the treaty is a clear indication of our willingness and determination to address the poorly regulated international arms trade. And Guyana must be commended for signing the arms trade treaty. It is a step in the right direction. But mere words on a piece of paper are meaningless unless they're implemented. For the treaty to be effective, it will require that we establish national regulations to control the transfer of conventional arms and components to regulate the trade. While we applaud the existence of the treaty, we are concerned about the numerous weaknesses which are contained therein. Mr. Speaker, a closer examination of the treaty in its entirety will bear this out. The impact of the treaty, a lot will depend on how stringently the treaty is implemented once it comes into force. We must continue to show our commitment to arms control by ensuring that we implement the necessary enabling regulations. The questions which loom are, how does Guyana intend to follow up on this? Are we going to set up a National Commission on Small Arms to ensure that arms imported into our country are used responsibly? Are we going to establish and maintain a national control system, including a national control list of weapons and items imported? If we do, we're certainly going to be on the right track. We have to be mindful too that we do not sign and ratify treaties and then honor them in the breach. Our citizens have been and continue to be the victims of human rights abuses, notwithstanding that we are signatories to existing human rights conventions, such as the International Convention on Torture. If a nation cannot maintain democratic law and order, it will not be able to maintain the Arms Trade Treaty. It is time that we demonstrate by our action that we do have the political will to give meaning to treaties to which we are signatories. I wish on behalf of a Partnership for National Unity to applaud the leaders of humanity who would have had the wisdom to put principles before profits and enable a future in which we can have more peace. I wish to support the motion in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I invite a colleague from the United States. Honourable Member Mr. Nagamutu to address the House.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the Alliance for Change to support the signing by the Republic of Guyana of the Arms Trade Treaty on June 3rd, 2013. Brings together a pool and a body of will by a number of countries to make our world safer from those who would want to use guns, whether conventional or unconventional, to terrorize, threaten, maim, and kill human beings.
However, Mr. Speaker, the goal of controlling arms and the arms race is still, in spite of all the laudatory measures of the United Nations and other international fora, in its initial stages. Because today we see that those big powers who still talk about controlling the arms race are themselves involved in an escalation of the arms race. We have had treaties dealing with the eradication of nuclear weapons, and still we see that not only big powers, but intermediate powers are also acquiring nuclear warheads and nuclear capabilities. So that if we were to step back from the precipice we were some years ago when we had an escalation of nuclear threat of war and the preparation thereof in interspace, when they had a spiral in the arms race into space. We have had a pullback there that we had not had in nuclear confirmation. So maybe we are reversing the process and starting at the beginning to deal with small arms. Because the danger ultimately in the use of force and the use of lethal weapons starts with very small weapons. And that is where I had said that in supporting this motion, that we need to address the issue of the political will. Merely signing on is an act of courage and commitment. But doing something to eliminate small arms and other arms is a safer guarantee that we intend to be faithful to our commitments and our international obligations. No more, Mr. Speaker, should we condone the situation where we had extrajudicial killings, where we have expose of people being issued with firearms who had killed, actually, someone for a loaf of bread or the payment for a meal and was issued an elevated caliber weapon. No more should we have death squads in Guyana. No more should we have the voluntary admission and, I would say, the condonation of elements linked to the narco-criminal trade, making disclosure that they work to help protect a government of this country. No more should we, because that is an indictment and a condemnation of the use of arms, small or big. And therefore, our commitment to international law must not simply be nominal, must not simply be an act for a photo opportunity, but it must be meant to live those acts to which we commit ourselves. And sir, if I say this, and I say this out of all my good friend who spoke before had said about all the things that have to be related in way of governance to small arms and arms trade in general, that it is a truism that the international, transnational criminal enterprise thrive on the basis of guns for coke and coke for guns. And we in Guyana, we have to see the nexus between the narco-criminal trade and arms trade. And we have to be condign in dealing with the proceeds of narco-criminals. And so the integration we see between arms trade and the suppression of arms trade and the drugs trade has to be seen in our commitment to enforcing the Anti-Money Laundering Act that we have passed. Not simply the reformation of the Act, but to enforce what is there on the statute to show that we have a zero tolerance in dealing with the proceeds of arms, of smuggling, and narco enterprise related matters. So that there is an integrated aspect to dealing with it, because if you contain the excess and the surpluses from the narco criminal trade, you are going to be able, and for money laundering, to be able to limit the possibility of trade in arms across the border. And yet, Mr. Speaker, I add also the integrated aspect to deal with corruption. If we are not serious on combating corruption in Guyana, then we might as well not sign treaties, because when you deal with corruption that is related to the transgression of international practices in procurement, then you are condoning the amassing of dirty money that will ultimately be fuel to protect the empire of dirty money. And how do they protect it? Not by holding the Bible, they hold the God. And that is how we have to look at our society in relation to governance, not in symbolic terms, but look at it in real terms. How do we transform our society and make our governance based on a governance that respects the worth and dignity of human beings? And you'll have to see the bigger picture. Mr. Speaker, the Alliance for Change supports this measure, support the action taken by our government and by our republic. We will wish that someday we could realize the Caribbean as a zone of peace, and to be respected as a zone of peace, and that we do not have incursion of superpowers, big powers, multinational powers within our zone to contaminate our region with trafficking of air weapons to protect vested and any other geopolitical interests. We will wish that CARICOM would one day stand firm on the issue of the Caribbean as a zone of peace, not only as a zone of peace, but also as a zone that should be free from the dumping of any nuclear waste or toxic waste that will contaminate the future of our country in the Caribbean, countries in the Caribbean, as a tourist destination with blue waters and white sands and a healthy atmosphere full of oxygen, and in Guyana, our black waters of the rivers. So that it is a small measure, but symbolically we support this as the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member, Mr. Felix.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present my case for the partnership for national unity in relation to the motion calling for the ratification of the Arms Trade Treaty, standing in the name of the Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. This treaty intends eventually to stop the flow of conventional weapons around the world in various areas of armed conflict. On the 2nd of April 2013, the General Assembly adopted the Arms Trade Treaty, regulating the international trade in conventional arms, from small arms to battle tanks, combat aircraft, and warships. This treaty aims to foster peace and security by halting the destabilizing arms flow to conflict regions. It will prevent human rights abusers and violators of the law of war from being supplied with arms, and it will keep warlords, pirates, and gangs from acquiring these deadly tools. In the international arena, the impact of the absence of regulations and loose control on the arms trade results in suffering visited on civilian populations trapped in situations of armed violence in settings of both crime and conflict, often in conditions of poverty, deprivation, and extreme inequality, where they are frequently on the receiving end of the misuse of arms by state armed forces, non-state armed groups, and organized criminal groups. In the preamble of the treaty, one of the clear intentions of the treaty is expressed as follows: underlining the need to prevent and eradicate the illicit trade in conventional arms and to prevent their diversion to the illicit market or for unauthorized end use and end users, including the commission of terrorist acts. After years of contemplation, this first international conventional arms control treaty has covered a wide array of pertinent issues, with the Secretariat to coordinate the activities of member states and to ensure compliance with the treaty. The treaty places full responsibility on states to provide legislation consistent with the terms of the treaty to prevent illicit and illegal trade from diverting the weapons subject of the treaty to unauthorized end users. The Arms Trade Treaty, which was signed by Guyana on 3rd June 2013, enforces that Guyana agrees with the terms set out in the treaty and would unhesitatingly proceed to take those steps necessary to bring legislation to this House to fulfill the requirements of the treaty. Article 2.1 of the treaty states, or as identifies conventional weapons to which the treaty applies, and they range from battle tanks, combat aircraft, attack helicopters, to small arms and light weapons. Article 2.2 of the treaty recognizes international trade to comprise export, import, transit, transshipment, and brokering or transfer. But the treaty does not intend to interfere with the international movement of conventional arms by or on behalf of a state party for its use once those arms remain within the state's party ownership. Some of the requirements set out in the treaty are: each state party is required to establish and maintain a national control system to regulate the export of ammunition, munition fired, launched, or delivered by conventional arms. This control system is also to be applied to the export of parts and components, but due care is required to ensure that the arms to be exported is in no form to be reassembled. This is a requirement for each state. There is the requirement for each state party to establish and maintain a national control system and control list to implement the provisions of this treaty. The control list, pursuant to national laws of the state party, must be provided to the Secretariat, which would circulate it to other states. States party are also required to take measures to implement the provisions of the treaty and shall designate competent national authorities to regulate one or more national points of contact. The treaty has also dealt extensively with import, brokering, and diversion of conventional arms to unauthorized end users. State parties, signatories to the treaty, are required to maintain national records of its issuance of export or authorization or its actual export of conventional arms. There is too a very strong reporting requirement. Each state party is mandated to submit an initial report to the Secretariat within the first year of the implementation of the treaty, of measures taken implement this treaty. By 31st May each year, a report must be submitted to the Secretariat by each state concerning authorized or actual exports and imports. The treaty seeks to foster international cooperation by encouraging states to cooperate with each other by exchanging information and consulting on matters of mutual interest. To implement this treaty, international assistance is promised. Each state party may seek assistance, including legislative, institutional capacity, more importantly for Guyana, model legislation, and effective practice and implementation. Mr. Speaker, having listened to the extent of the arms treaty, conventional arms treaty, one must ask whether this government, with its record of signing treaties overseas and returning to Guyana and failing to do anything about them, we have had a recent experience. So the point must be questioned whether this government has the commitment to implement the treaty and its requirements. We must note that Guyana has large, uncontrolled borders, and illicit arms enter freely. There are airstrips, illegal airstrips, discovered every now and again all over this country, in which drugs and arms and other illegal activities are facilitated. It is therefore in our interest, Mr. Speaker, to cooperate with the international community to ensure that we fight against this nefarious trade and to help ourselves to ensure that illicit arms is intercepted before it reaches Guyana. We have had our experiences, unpleasant though they might have been. We have had the assassination of a minister of government through the use of illicit weapons by criminals. We have had the Lusitnan experience. We have had the Buxton experience. We have had the Bartica massacre. When we had, Mr. Speaker, we have had pardon me?
Don't be phased.
No, I'm not worried with
Proceed,
Mr. Speaker, we have had other unpleasant experiences. People have been shot in their beds. The government is hardly able to protect the fishermen from pirates. They are hardly able to protect the miners in the interior. Almost every month, you have a robbery in the interior.
The government depends on the police force.
But without resources, without training, that is a serious problem. With bad political management, worse yet. Mr. Speaker, this is an important motion which APNU supports. But we must bemoan government attitude in making a step forward and not following through with the correct action. We hope that this bill receives the full support of government and that they bring the legislation to this parliament to give effect to the treaty, which is what is required to make the treaty operable in Guyana. I now say, without any reservation, that the Partnership for National supports the motion, but we expect government to do its part. All my very good friends over there, to play their respective roles in ensuring that the correct thing is done and that we are able to add our lot to prevent the circulation of illicit arms and ammunition around the world. Thank you.
Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs, I invite you to rebut and
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the speakers, the honorable members, Africa Salmon, for their support for the motion before us. Mr. Speaker, a common thread running in the presentations by all the speakers is that of the need to ensure that we have the enabling regulations and legislation to ensure that this treaty has feet. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned before, it's a travesty that up until now on our law books, the import, export, diversion, and transport, illegal that is, it's still not on our law books as an offense. If we want an example of bad political management, I think that's one. Because the bill was here before us in this. Mr. Speaker, let me say that the UN register right now on conventional arms does not include small arms and light weapons. And this treaty will now ensure that that reporting mechanism is put in place. And for that, we are very happy. Mr. Speaker, I wish to say that up until a few minutes ago when I checked, 24 countries, as I mentioned before, had signed the treaty and 0 had ratified. If we do this tomorrow, we could very well be the first country in the world to do this. And I think in all that is happening, at least as a country, we should be proud of that. I wanted, therefore, I will not answer the other issues raised. I think they're not related to the Arms Trade Treaty, but I would beg, Mr. Speaker, perhaps you can play a major role here in having the pieces of legislation that did not receive the support of this House receive the support the next time it comes here. I'm aware of the parliamentary regulations, but hopefully we would be able to overcome those personality issues that the opposition may have with some of us on this side.
Honourable Member, I thank you. I see the reformers around the dance, I think we're bringing it back.
I will be.
But, honourable members, we have, in this short space of time, done something very eventful, and that is to lend our unanimous support to a very, very important treaty that was signed by our representative in New York. And the action of the government and our ambassador of the United Nations must be commended. I therefore am pleased to put the motion that it be approved by this House and that Guyana becomes the first country to ratify this treaty by its parliamentary action. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it, and I congratulate you all for this decision. Thank you very much. Honourable members, we continue with government business. There is a telecommunications bill number 18 of 2012 to be debated.
And the accompanying Public Utilities Commission Amendment Bill of 2012, that they both be deferred as we continue to negotiate with GT&T and DG7.
Thank you, Honourable Prime Minister. Honourable members, at the request of the introducer of the bill, the Honourable Prime Minister, the Telecommunications Bill and the Public Utilities Commission Amendment Bill are being deferred to a date to be named, and we thank you for the update. We now pass to private members' business. Members, we have the second reading of Married Persons Property Amendment Bill, which I'm told will not be proceeded with, as Mr. Back the Deputy Speaker is not with us this afternoon. And so we will have that deferred, and I see the Chief Whip come. Thank you. Informing me that that is so.
Mr. Speaker, I said all of that to say this. We cannot fight to represent the rights of persons in a different land when at home we cannot have hers respected and have to take to the streets with blood being shed and lives lost to ensure justice. And as President Ramtar recently told the United States to put their house in order before they look at us, when the United States was reaching out to us in a similar fashion.
Honorable member, be cautioned that the President's name may not be used in a debate on a motion for or against. Proceed. Go ahead. That will stand, but let's not invoke the President's name in favor of your argument.
Out to us in similar fashion as the PPP did to the Palestine. I say to the honorable members on the opposite side of the House to please be advised that Guyana has to first put our house in order before we can tell the Israelis and Palestinians what to do. The refusal of the government to heed our various petitions caused us to plan a 5-day protest from July 18 to July 22, 2012 with police permission. On July 18, unarmed residents and supporters gathered for a legal and peaceful protest and were subject to barbaric treatment by the Guyana police force, resulting in the deaths of our heroes, Mr. Alan Lewis and the youthful Messrs. Ron Somerset and Shemwal Bowie, and injuries to scores, including children and women. There was a commission of inquiry. The findings are public, and ours is the expectation the executive would implement the recommendations for police reform, for our blood must not be in vain, and borrowing the expression from former President Barrow Chapin, it is on your hands, quote unquote. It is most fortunate and a stain on this nation that it had to take the deaths and injuries of our loved ones before the government could consider respecting our rights to be treated as equals, a right guaranteed to us under the law, and a right we will fight to maintain if it takes our last breath or last drop of blood. The people of Region 10 are in this for the long haul, and while some use their dead for political prop to sow seeds of discord, the people of Linden and Region 10 will use theirs to fight for a better society for all and live up to the country's creed of one people, one nation, one destiny. Mr. Speaker and honorable members, the August 21st, 2012 agreement seeks to install a regional land selection committee, an economic committee to develop a regional economic plan, a technical committee to comprehensively examine power generation in the region, and the return of the television dish and channel that belong to the Linden community. Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate that the committees which was established no longer function, and the other one remains an unfruitful dream. And this National Assembly must therefore resolve that the government of Guyana immediately adheres to the commitments and obligations under the written agreement of August 21st, 2012, thereby ensuring that the benefits which were to accrue to the residents of Region 10 are realized, and that the government of Guyana be held solely accountable and responsible for all direct and indirect consequences flowing from its continued unwillingness to adhere to the letter and spirit of the written agreement of August 21st, 2012 parties. This motion is brought today to present this House an opportunity to demonstrate to the people of Guyana that when called upon, we can together obey the laws of the land, respect the rights of the people, and honor agreements we made on behalf of the people. This opportunity to demonstrate to the people the advice the government gave to the USA. That is, we can get our house in order before we tell others, like Palestine and Israel, how to fix theirs. Thank you, Mr.
Honourable members, before one second, Mr. Honourable members, we are about to start a debate on a vexed issue, a very troubling, emotional issue. We have had last year a motion of no confidence moved against the minister. Much of what transpired on the 18th of July, the days just prior and the days just after, has been ventilated in this house already. The point I want to make is that we don't want a debate that takes us back into that time. The motion before us is for a resolution for the agreement of the 21st of August to be implemented, and that if it is not, we will hold government responsible. So I'll be looking to ensure that we don't find ourselves plunged into a rehash. I know that Prime Minister may be saying that some of it is unavoidable. I accept that, but let us not find ourselves at that point. Thank you. Go ahead, Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I would have liked, it's not, I wanted to interject, I'm asking you to be here. I would have liked hearing what you just said. Like maybe this motion would have been withdrawn. And the presentation there made a lot of insinuations against this government, which it is very difficult for us to sit here and take without responding fully and completely. I would therefore ask whether the honourable member would consider withdrawing the motion.
I don't think the member will withdraw. So let's proceed with the debate. Let us proceed. Honourable member, Mr. Lumumba.
First of all, I would like to, on behalf of the government of Guyana, let the people be content, in particular, those of Linden and Lisbon, know that we are prepared, and all been prepared, to move past the recent incident and work with reasonable elected officials to be content to find a path, proper path. Mr. Speaker, I'm very disappointed in some comments made by the people. I believe that the objective of the motion should be to find a way to move forward. But, Mr. Speaker, if we want to go down the road of calling people names, we'll have to defend ourselves. And we'll have to, at some point, make reference to some of the past. We have no choice in this matter. Mr. Speaker, I hope that your pronouncement will have been done prior to Mr. Speaker's statement. Mr. Speaker, Ms. Gazoon cannot be serious when she's used every opportunity to insult this government, like a costing exercise she led that was directed towards the Honorable Prime Minister and Linden Town Day opening. She cannot be serious when she, as a member of Parliament, led a costing exercise against the Prime Minister.
There's somebody's phone. Honourable members, we are starting. Honourable member, Mr. Lumumba, I am aware that there was an incident at the launching of Mayday. I don't know whether coarse words were used. As long as you can verify what is said. But I am aware that there was an incident indeed.
I'm willing to move past all of this. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, Ms. Kisula's uses of articulate and to mention racial terms over a dozen times during her presentation. In addition, Mr. Speaker, Ms. Kisula cannot really believe that the predominantly Afro-Guyanese from the region 10 want to be exempted from equal participation in the electricity race in this country. We can argue about the process, we we can argue with the path towards that quality. But certainly, no one can argue that it should not happen, and it must not happen. Mr. Speaker, everybody can fight. We still need to understand that. I don't think people on this side can't fight. We are not made of strong. Everybody can fight, and everybody can protest and misbehave. So that's not the end game, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we cannot be seriously talking about this government as if this government is some rural government and I'm not even concerned for it. Mr. Speaker, let me briefly, and we don't want to go through on the past, but let me briefly touch on the people. Briefly, I have to.
Yeah, we're dealing with July of 2012.
Yes, I am.
Linden.
I am, Madam Chief. Mr. Speaker, you should have reminded her that. Mr. Speaker, when we came into power, there was no
You weren't there.
outside distribution for the people of Region 10.
When we came into power, you were there.
Mr. Speaker, when we came into power, we had no record of destroying baking shop and banning for in Region 10. Mr. Speaker, when we came in power, we have no record of violent anti-union activities in Region 10. Mr. Speaker, when we came into power, we have no record of mass layoff in the public industry. Mr. Speaker, when we came to power, we dilapidated infrastructure, roads, and drainage in Region 10. Mr. Speaker, what did we do? Mr. Speaker, this government subsidized the Bobsleigh company with millions of US dollars annually to ensure that the people of Linden will get a decent standard of living. Mr. Speaker, this government improved the potable water system in Region 10 and is continuing to do that. Mr. Speaker, this government improved the roads, every road, every street corners in Region 10. Mr. Speaker, this government stabilized the public industry in Region 10. Mr. Speaker, this government proceeded on a massive housing drive in Region 10, in particular Amelia's Ward. Mr. Speaker, this government put an end to rigged elections in Region 10.
We all can't come. 10,000, you forget.
Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the process of discussion in Region 10, the committee that we had. Mr. Speaker, I want to inform you that of all the meetings we'll have in the Office of the President, MP Kisun have not spoken twice. She enters the meeting, she bows her head on the table, and Mr. Sharma passed a note to their leader, Aubrey Norton and Mr. Norton. The meetings are led by Mr. Norton. There's no input. We can bring the records. This honorable member of parliament has not participated physically other than bowing and going to the meeting in a chair and put your chin on the table. This is the level of representation that's given to Region 10. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Solomon is not interested in resolution of this matter. He's interested in squatting, sending people to squat, sending up illegally occupied land.
Mr. Solomon is not here. He asked this, that express his gratitude, but please be cautious about what is said about him in his absence.
With the region and the delegation, I am saying to you, the leader of the delegation has been involved or wants involved in squatting, a pronounced on squatting. He is the leader of the delegation. He's also been an active member of the delegation. His role in the delegation is to pass notes to his leader. His leader is not the honorable opposition leader. His leader is Mr. Aubrey Norton.
He will be coming back.
whose name was on the list and who was responsible for the victory in the elections in Region 10, not Mr. Norton or Mr. Salomon. Mr. Speaker, I believe we negotiated with the wrong person.
Well, you may, that's whose fault.
Whose fault?
If you've been renegotiated wrong, let us stick to the resolution at hand.
Well, I'm speaking to the resolution. The resolution, that's a problem, it's faulty. The resolution should be amended to call on Mr. Granger to take over the negotiations.
Mr. Rankin.
Mr. Speaker, I am not here to back anybody. All I'm here to say that we are prepared at all times to have serious negotiations. I do not believe you can have serious negotiations with those who sit across the table. That may be the resolution, to me, as heirs, and those who prepare the resolution. I think the Honorable Abdisha has no choice but to show that he's had some level of cooperation with the team from Region 10. But I know deep in his heart, he recognizes that they're inept. I mean, capable of representing his political party. And that's all I want to say, Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Piraya, I invite you to address the office of this motion dealing with the implementation of the 31st August agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, without rehashing, as you've cautioned us not to do, the actual events of the Linden protests of 2012, I think it would be useful nevertheless to remind ourselves of the sequence of events surrounding the signing of the 21st of August agreement. At the signing ceremony that was actually scheduled for the 20th, the chairman of the region declined to actually sign the agreement because the work on the commission of inquiry that was actually being pursued elsewhere had not been completed. So that notwithstanding the assembled persons, the media, members of the government, members of the political parties, members of the region, we in fact had to defer the signing until the following day. And on the 21st, in the morning of that day, the parties sat together and completed the terms of reference for the Commission of Inquiry, removing the clause that in fact had caused concern among the opposition parties. We then, in fact, had the ceremonial signing, and at that signing, the chairman of Region 10 had expressed the wish, which he communicated in writing to us, that the leaders of the opposition parties in Parliament should bring the agreement for the endorsement of the National Assembly. He did write such a letter to us on the 21st of August. It has finally reached us today, some 10 months later, appended to the motion in the name of my colleague, Member of Parliament, Kissoul. So that we get a sense of the ebb and flow of events, Mr. Speaker. The agreement, as I said, was scheduled for signing the day before. And notwithstanding all the preparations and the assembled gathering, the chairman, as I say, had great concerns that the Commission of Inquiry, we had not arrived at the conclusion. So we dispersed. So it was on the 21st of August that we actually sat together again. By this time, the problems in the Commission of Inquiry had been referenced and been resolved. And it had been resolved because the government withdrew its insistence on the inclusion of the clause that had in fact caused problems for us here in the opposition. We have to ask ourselves, what is the value of this debate on the agreement now, almost 1 year after it was signed? I think there is a value. First, I think, Mr. Speaker, it permits us, now removed from the heat and turmoil
and violence of those days. Days that were marked by the wounding of scores of citizens and the shooting to death of citizens. It allows us to carefully examine the sequence of events that led up to the tragedy of July 18th and to draw the necessary lessons if we are to avoid such excesses in the future. Secondly, it provides us with yet another opportunity to gauge the value of agreements in general and to understand the true reasons for the implementation deficit. Since I think we can all agree that the history of implementation of agreements forged over the years, usually at moments of national crisis, has not been stellar. Since our parties are currently engaged in discussions in and out of select and standing committees on a number of crucially important issues, such as the local government legislation, the anti-money laundering legislation, the Amila Falls hydropower project, the GPL, among them, it is more necessary than ever, if these engagements are to be fruitful, that we commit ourselves to the strict and timely honoring of agreements that we reach. This touches on an issue on which members of the government, most recently and plaintively, my friend the Honorable Prime Minister, are ready to sermonize at great length on the issue of trust. How do we build trust? And perhaps more importantly, how do we overcome the legacy of mistrust, now half a century old and counting? The PPP argues that trust is a precondition for the establishment of institutions of shared governance and national reconciliation. I don't think this distorts their position. I must confess that I have always found this a somewhat tawdry evasion and an alibi for inaction. Coming from a party that once vaunted its adherence to the principles of dialectical materialism, it is to my mind a woefully undialectical view of process. And we ask ourselves, did the Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland trust one another before entering into the arrangements of the Good Friday Agreement? Did de Klerk and Mandela trust one another before entering into shared governance arrangements of the transitional government of national unity that closed the chapter on apartheid? Did the Arabs and Africans in Zanzibar establish a government of national unity because they trusted one another? In the drive for negotiated solutions in Palestine, in the Palestine-Israel conflict, in the Syrian catastrophe, to mention only the most advanced of current crises, are they doomed to defeat because of the lack of trust between the parties in conflict? Thirdly, the Linden upsurge of 2012 has lessons for the forms of struggle available in a parliamentary, or as the Attorney General, who is not here, as he would insist, a constitutional democracy. Why do people take to the streets, even when and where elected governments exist? I won't cite the example that some commentators like to cite, namely the Arab Spring, because most of these revolts were against tyrannies and unelected despots. But more recently, the protests in Turkey and Brazil, I think, teach us important lessons. Important lessons partly to tell us why people felt the need, even in these elected government situations, why did they feel the need to take to the streets, and importantly, to note the difference in approach by the governments of Turkey and Brazil. I wrote recently, and this is what I have to say on the Linden crisis. Dangerously for the ruling party, the Linden Rebellion of 2012 was a victory for people's power in the teeth of an unrelenting propaganda offensive on the state-owned radio, television, and printed media, reinforced by the use of police and military power.
Fourthly, Mr. Speaker, as we prepare ourselves for the long-awaited local government elections and anticipate the arrival in this House of the legislation with a new design for a reformed local government system, we must draw the lesson of Linden. I said before that I believe that in the months and years ahead, the Linden Rebellion of 2012 will come to be seen as the most significant blow struck for the self-determination of regional and local government bodies against the imposition of authority and control by the central government, since the imposition of the centralizing 1980 Constitution that vested supreme executive authority in a president. It was, to my mind, the most robust assertion of the primacy of the declaratory Article 13 of the 1919 revisions of the 1980 Constitution. My friend, the Honorable Mr. Soon, has already alluded to the significance of Article 13 and draws the lesson there too, that what took place in Linden was, in effect, an assertion of the rights embodied in Article 13. The motion today, Mr. Speaker, presents us with the opportunity to do a number of things. I think we need to examine carefully the implementation deficit and consider ways to overcome it. We have heard that the technical and economic committees are in fact in abeyance. There have been struggles over the issue of who chair the committee and so on, but the net result is that after all these months, and after the intense struggles to establish these committees and reach agreement, that the committees have so far yielded nothing. The Economic Committee is of great importance, not only because it was designed to set out a plan for the economic development of Linden, but it was put there to answer the position taken by the citizens of Linden that it was not because they refused to pay, they didn't want to pay the tariff, but because they were unable to do so. And we felt that the Economic Committee should be established to in effect determine whether what were the true economic conditions facing the people of the community. The technical committee that was in effect going to examine the entire history of the electricity situation in Linden, that we believe was very important because we had to take into account how Linden had reached the position that it reached in relation to the electricity subsidy. So that too has not yielded anything. The Land Selection Committee was designed to put an end to what was felt was the arbitrary giving away of lands to people, and it was felt that the region wanted to have an input into how lands was going to be distributed. So that too, although it was apparently now been established, I think it's yet to produce the kind of work that it was intended to. In the agreement, as you will see, we had in effect anticipated difficulties of implementation. And for that reason, we had imposed strict timelines on the work of the committees, that they were in effect meant to come back and report to the plenary after, I believe, 2 weeks. And they were to present their report after a fixed number of days and so on. And what I want to say that all of that in the agreement has not been honored. I am not seeking to sit here and say, well, the reason it hasn't been ordered is because some set of people didn't want to honor it. The fact of the matter is that we fell into what I can call a kind of paralysis within the committees, and I would urge that one of the things we do today is to recommit ourselves to the terms of the agreement and ensure that these committees are put in place at the earliest opportunity and begin to do the work not only of doing what it is they were designed for, but also in reporting back to the plenaries on the progress that is being made, so that if problems arise within the work of the committees, we are in a position to actually correct them. The second important thing, Mr. Speaker, I think we need to identify the lessons we learned and to take steps to ensure that there will be no recurrence. of this kind of development, and that we will be guided in the resolution of these matters, not only by our own experience, but by the experience of others. This, to my mind, is the value of the motion today. And I, for one, would regret if the motion before us were used really as a way of rehashing old arguments and getting back into a situation where we end up by, throwing dead dogs over the fence of each other. I think the important thing is to recognize that we have I think that we have had a problem not in arriving at the agreement. I remember being present at many of the meetings that actually forged the agreement. I think people on both sides worked very, very diligently to arrive at the agreement to arrive at. And it is, to my mind, a shame that after all this time, so much of the agreement remains unimplemented. I think if we look carefully at all of this, Mr. Speaker, and try to examine honestly why this is happening, and see what kind of remedies can be found, then the motion today will serve a very useful purpose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, members. Members, it is 4:45. I propose that we take the suspension. Now we resume at 4:45, at which time Honourable Minister, Mr. Bennett, will address the House.